Parshas Teruma describes in detail the construction of the tabernacle. So we're going to call it the Mishkan. Okay, so from now on, Mishkan is this tabernacle. We have in it a detailed description first of the vessels that were there. For example, the Holy Ark, a table that held the showbreads, the menorah that we are familiar with, and then the walls and the covers of the tabernacle itself. Parashat Teruma, you can find on page 444. When you study this section, so you could spend many hours on figuring out the details of how it looked. And obviously, throughout the years, there are going to be some disagreements on precise details. At times, by studying a specific detail, you could find some fulfillment when you see eventually replicas. For example, if you do remember, I remember visiting Israel 11 years ago, and I was in the Cardo, and they had the golden menorah there, And this golden menorah, which has the proper dimensions, when I visited a few years later, it got closer to the Temple Mount, and it seems to be that is their destination, at least of the individuals who made this magnificent vessel. And if you look carefully, etched on it are shapes of almonds. And it's based on the reading that the word meshukadim that appears in the portion is not just generic designs, but rather specifically designs that appear like a shaked. So you see almond-like shape. So quite fulfilling because you sat many hours trying to figure out the text, and then it comes to life. So that is one way of studying this section. But another approach is that perhaps after you have an understanding of the basics, you move on to the symbolic meaning of those vessels. You work with symbolism. Now, symbolism is obviously very important. A week or two ago, maybe it was last week, there was vandalism in a cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri. Okay. St. Louis has a very old Jewish community. Actually, the first Eruv in North America was in St. Louis itself, already around 1895. So the fights began already a long time ago, if it is kosher, if it's not kosher. So St. Louis has a very old community, and obviously we in our tradition put a lot of emphasis that we respect the kavod hameis, that cemeteries should be treated properly. There's a big mitzvah for those being involved with the welfare of cemeteries, and I'm pointing here to Alan, who has a few headaches from many areas, but among them is one of the cemeteries that he takes care of. So to go ahead and to walk in and to find tombstones that are knocked over is a very harsh reality, and it's in the news, and it should be. So among the images that we saw last week was that you had a visit in that cemetery from the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and he said a few words about there's no room for anti-Semitism, and the next image was that he takes off his jacket, rolls up his sleeves, put on gloves, and he assists in the process of cleaning the cemetery. Now, that is an incredible act. It is not an incredible act because if he wouldn't do it, others would not, because obviously you could hire workers there, right? You could, probably you could hire some illegal workers, you just shouldn't tell the president, and they could do it for very cheap. That's not the purpose of what he was doing. What he was doing, it was more symbolic. The idea is that this is important, and here I am, the Vice President of the United States, and it is something that I feel is important for us to know that this is not the way we treat a cemetery, especially not a Jewish cemetery, because we know world history, and we know very well what the meaning behind and what the agenda of such individuals who do this have. That is a symbolic act. So symbolism has obviously its place. It has an impact on us. and in so many fields, in arts, in architecture. So obviously, if we approach this section with understanding that symbolism has its place, so we could go ahead and we could read the text of this week's portion with an understanding that there must be a message there. Why gold? Why wood? Right? Why this material? And why does it have to be done in a specific way? In addition, we want to read in, the reading of the text itself should be done with precision, because perhaps a nuance, and perhaps if the text itself shifts from one word to another, there's a message there as well. So with that introduction, we're going to go ahead and turn to this portion. However, what you have to remember is the following. As a nation, with the beginning of this process of constructing this structure, our national identity and spiritual identity is founded here. In other words, our religion was based on Mishkan Mikdash. In the days of the Bet HaMikdash, in the days of the temple, the average child, today they have in schools these brachos, bees. In other words, that at a very young age, in second or third or fourth grade, the child comes home with a pamphlet and they start learning the brachos of different things, right? What you make a bracha on potato chips and on an ice cream cone, and obviously on the 15 or 20 different types of cereals. It used to be easier, it was only cornflakes and Rice Krispies. But today, there's a whole long list of different cereals that you have to know, which one's a shahakol, which one's a mizonos. So there's an expectation that for a child to practice their religion, they should know the proper way of expressing their appreciation to Almighty God for the wonderful cereals you could get in the morning, and all the wonderful sugar that it brings into the system. So that is what the religion is based on. Wonderful. In the days of the Bet HaMikdash, there was a Tuma and Tahara bi. In other words, in the days of the Bet HaMikdash, you knew very well that if you were not in a state of purity, you cannot make your way into the Temple Mount. Now, being not in a state of purity can come about in many different ways. You come in contact with a corpse or a vessel that touched the corpse, or a specific type of rodent, or if you enter into a house that's connected. There are many different scenarios. And due to the fact that this was so significant for the nation, their ability to enter the Har HaBayit or not enter, there was an expectation from a very young age that the child should have knowledge in that field. So this was a religion that centered around Mishkan earlier on. The Mishkan is the term that is used for this temporary, mobile structure that was used until eventually they settled in Yerushalayim. And the structure itself evolved, meaning in the wilderness it travels. They come to Eretz Yisrael and it settles in a place called the Gilgal. Eventually it settles in Shiloh, but it's still a semi-mobile structure, because even in Shiloh it was not a permanent structure, even though it was there for a short 369 years. Eventually they have this complete structure known as the Bet HaMikdash, stands in Yerushalayim for 410 years, and then the second one for an additional 420 years. This structure becomes the hub of our religion. So this is a very significant event, because it's going to be telling us what the religion is about. And you have to remember that the ability Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had in the year 70, so we're going back close to 2,000 years ago, where he is gathering the rabbis, and they are supposed to guide the nation of Israel. And they are supposed to be guided to be still a nation, an Am Kadosh, a spiritual nation, a religious nation. Without this hub was a mission impossible, and the success he had to reshape Yiddishkeit, right? To go ahead and point out that there are other fundamentals, and this will become the new core of our religion, the study of Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. The ability Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had is supernatural, and it was in the incredible success the man had, that you could retain it. You have a nation that for hundreds of years, thousands of years, have one identity, and then the identity is yanked from them, and yet he was able to go ahead and keep the nation together, and we have a new identity that keeps us all as one. unbelievable success the man had. But you have to understand the depth and the significance of what we are reading about here. This is the beginning of the construction of our identity. And as believing Jews, we know and we wait for a return when these vessels come into play again. Let's understand that. And then we have to go ahead and analyze the words. Let's analyze the words here. Number one, Mishkan, the term used for the early structure, and then Mikdash. And almost in all cases, when the Torah or our tradition wants to describe the temporary, early on structure that was made for the nation of Israel, they call it a Mishkan, and then it turns eventually into a Mikdash. Fine. What's the difference between the two? That's question number one. And what we're going to have to point out is the fact that there are two cases, perhaps more, but two clear cases where the text decides to describe, on the surface at least, the Mishkan as a Mikdash and the Mikdash as a Mishkan. And where are they? So number one, let's turn to the beginning of this week's portion. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Daber al bnei Yisrael v'yikchu li truma. They should go ahead and take for me a gift, a portion. And what should they be taking from the people of Israel? Gold, silver, copper. So we have our metals. The list continues. And now, fast forward to verse 9, that the goal is, what is the purpose of all this? Excuse me, verse 8. What is the purpose of collecting all these goods? Ve'asu li, that they shall make for me a mikdash, and I shall dwell among them. V'shachanti b'tocham. So here, even though right and left we're going to call it a mishkan, 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 for some reason it calls it a mikdash. Now, why is it so? So let's try to analyze the difference between the term mishkan and mikdash. You know, as a religion, we at times focus on our responsibility towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and at times we talk about the good things that the Almighty does for us. Yeah? How do you call Pesach? Pesach. How is it called in the Torah? Chag HaMatzot. What's the difference between the two? Well, when it comes to Pesach, we are giving credit to the Almighty that in Egypt, as there is a plague that's occurring, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what did he do? He pasach, he either skipped or he had mercy on us, and he allowed us to survive. So we are very grateful to the Almighty for what occurred in those days, and we're going to call it a Pesach. On the other hand, the Almighty calls it Et Chag HaMatzot. Who are you giving credit when you go ahead and identify the holiday as Chag HaMatzot? Who are you giving the credit to? Who is the Almighty, who is HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving credit to? To the people of Israel. That here they are, they're on their way. Here's a journey they're preparing for. And you know how Jews go for a journey. Remember we go to Niagara Falls, with my aunt and my late father, and we go to Niagara Falls, right? How long does it take? An hour and a half. You come there, what's the first thing you do? You take out the sandwich, right? And I said, Rabbi Milevsky, we just an hour and a half, do we really have to have a sandwich? And a sandwich means you go ahead, you wash, and it's a whole experience there. But this is how we Jews travel, right? You have to go ahead, and the cooler must be full. And here we go, left of Hacharai, they make their way into the wilderness. Nothing's prepared, and they did not even bake their matzos. There's something quite incredible, that this is a nation of faith. Chag HaMatzot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives credit to the people of Israel, and we find this quite often. Almighty is saying, Mika Amcha Yisrael, and we are saying that there is no one like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is the relationship that we have. It's considered a healthy relationship when two parties work like that, like a healthy marriage, when each one is grateful to the other party. So this is what we have right here. When we analyze Mishkan and Mikdash, we're going to see that Mishkan, when we call it a Mishkan, we are focusing on the fact that God dwells in this structure. God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dwells among us. Not bad, eh? We are a nation, and we have God dwelling among us. On the other hand, when we call it mikdash, when we call it a mikdash, sanctification, that term seems to make or expect something from us, that we sanctify ourselves. We be worthy of having such a structure by sanctifying ourselves. That's the difference between the two. Now, it's much easier to sell a mishkan than to sell a mikdash. You know, like, people travel in this generation a lot. People travel in this room a lot. And we welcome everyone back. It's good to have you. Now, one of the places that a good Jew visits is obviously the land of Israel. Right? You go to Eretz Yisrael, it's very inspiring. You have the opportunity to study the history of the people. You have the ability of studying the current incredible developments that occur. It's a place where you could meditate about the future of our nation. It's a very special place, no question about that. Now, people, when they go to Israel, you ask them, what did you do there? So, some people say, well, I had to deal with bureaucracies and figure out how to, pay a gas bill. But people have their own stories. But for the tourist, what do you do in Israel? So obviously there has to be attractions. Remember when we had the shul trip, when was it, about 6 years ago? 6 years ago we had a shul trip, and people said that the success of the planners, it was David and Fran, I think that the success was that here were people that visited the land of Israel 10, 15 times, and you were still able to identify specific locations that they did not have the ability to appreciate up until now. So you want to find locations. So what would you have on your to-do list when you visit the land of Israel? That's the question I would ask. Unfortunately, there's a joke I have. And my joke is that perhaps the Israeli government could start advertising that come visit our jails. Because our jails are quite incredible, because you could walk in, they could give you a tour, they'll charge you, worry not, there'll be air-conditioned bus to the jail, there'll be a good meal afterwards, and as you walk through, they'll point to one cell and say, here was the former president. And in the next cell, here was the former prime minister. And in the next cell, here's the former chief rabbi. Right? You could have that. So that's a sad joke, and we could learn from those. Too painful, you say? I shouldn't have mentioned. Okay, scratch that off the tape. So that's perhaps. But the truth is, there are many people when they go in specific communities that they are seeking something spiritual. Deep down, by the way, for the record, if you go to the land of Israel, and what I believe is an ideal trip to the land of Israel is one that you appreciate your personal prayers. We have a tradition that in the land of Israel, our prayers are accepted more. Right? It's a different type of prayer. So meditate on prayer before you go. During your visit, that's perhaps one thing you could do. When you do eat out there, right? Be sure to focus on the blessings and focus on the fact that this is an incredible gift, that you have high-end food, right? I don't think it was like that 50 years ago when you visited in 1966, Avi. I don't think they had high-end restaurants exactly in what? No, you couldn't find kosher restaurants. You couldn't find. So here you have, this is a country where we have, if you do go to a high-end restaurant, think about it. What a gift we have. You can make the brachos. Those are good things you could do. But people seek spiritual experiences where they are in the land of Israel. Among them, and a popular one is going to graves. As one of my younger brothers says, that when he goes to a grave and he takes a picture with himself on the grave, he calls it a gravy, right? That's what he does. So now, people go to graves. Now, I will not say that there's no source in our tradition to visit graves. We find, if you open up the Midrashim, what happened with the Kalev ben Yefuneh when the spies were sent into the land of Israel. He went to Hebron, no question about that there's a purpose. Now, at the same time, I don't know about every single grave that some tour guide is selling you, that's one that you go and your prayers are accepted there, that it has any purpose at all. I'm not sure. I don't know. But graves are popular. It gives you the ability to go somewhere, you pray, you make requests from the Almighty, you come with a long list of what you want from God, you feel you have experienced something spiritual, and mission accomplished. Fine. That is very popular indeed, and there are new Mekomos Kedoshim that are invented over the last decade. There are a few of them that have developed, that someone identifies some grave, and they go ahead and start sharing stories of prayers that are answered. And yes, indeed, there is no question that if 20 people pray there and 10 of them are answered, they're going to give credit to the holy person that's buried there. That is something that is part of our tradition. Ask from God, what has God done for me lately? Now, I would make another suggestion that's going to go nowhere. And that is the following. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, you've heard of him. He came up with this concept called a Bet HaMusar. Bet HaMusar. What is a Bet HaMusar? That you have a little shtibel, a little room, or a little beis medrash, that you go in, and on the shelves you will find the works of Rabbeinu Yonah or Mesilas Yesharim, right? A text that focuses on the flaws that we have as human beings, and they give us the tools. When you are aware of the fact that you are not perfect and you identify that specific flaw, you are given the tools to work and to improve. So if you have a tendency to sometimes be in a bad mood in the morning, right, and you realize that this is something that perhaps causes discomfort to those who are around me, so you focus on it and you develop improvement in that field. Okay? You know, I could share with you a line here that to be a good Jew, you cannot only talk about God's good and ignore man's or the human's bad. One more time. To be a good Jew, you cannot only talk about the goodness of God and ignore the flaws, right, that the human has. On the other hand, if you focus only on the human's bad, you will never, right, see God's good. What's the idea? Yeah, it has to be balanced. Things have to be balanced. We have to work on self-improvement. That's a lot of Judaism. But at the same time, if you overdo it and you only focus on negative, you're not going to be a good Jew, because your whole essence and your whole outlook of life will be about the negative. Things have to be balanced. No question about that. So, back to my trip to Israel. What am I suggesting that we should put on our to-do list? A visit to a Beit HaMusar, meaning go to Israel and study there and focus on self-improvement. How far will it go? Obviously not too far, because it is far more attractive to go to a site where I can make requests from God, things I need, than sit in a room and make demands from myself. It's much harder. It's very, self-improvement is very, very hard. So it's not going to be a site that will attract people on our trip. Mishkan Mikdash. So what is a Mishkan? Mishkan is easy, right? What do? There's an expectation that God Almighty comes and settles where we are. Mikdash is an expectation of myself. I have to sanctify myself. I have to go ahead and realize that I have to become a better person, right? I have to remove impurities from my interactions, from my personality, from my outlook. It starts with a Mishkan and it ends with a Mikdash. In other words, the nation of Israel itself at that time is a very primitive nation. The nation of Israel that left Egypt was not this nation